Hey everybody, welcome to the I303 podcast where we share ingenious insights and oddball opinions from the perspective of an IO. Today I have Dr. Stephen Zhou with me, and we're going to talk a little bit about his experience getting into the IO field. He recently has a book published, and then we're going to transition into talking about leadership. Can it be quantified? So with that said, Dr. Stephen, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about your origin story.
It's so wonderful to be here.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thanks so much again for having me. I'm really excited to share a little bit about my story and hopefully help out somebody who's listening. And if you're listening and are interested in anything that I share, please feel free to get in touch. I'm an open book and would love to connect outside of the walls of this audio file here. Brief origin story. So I actually studied IO psychology in undergrad. I discovered what it was early on in my undergraduate career and realized, I started as a psych major and didn't want to go clinical. And then I switched over to business, but I didn't want to do all the marketing. And I still landed somewhere in between. I realized what IO was. I realized it fit not only my area of my research interest at the time, just interest in learning more, of course, but also just a little bit about what I thought my skill sets were in, right? I like organizing things, like leading things. I think I'm decently good at kind of keeping structure together, if you will, and hopefully motivating others. I don't know. You can ask my students.
Yeah.
But that I realized that was a good fit for me. I did a bachelor's in psychology, stayed and did a master's degree not in IO, but actually it was more so that I could continue working in student affairs and leadership development there. So my work was really IO is what happened. And that was actually what gave me a taste for teaching and research, and I realized that's the path I wanted to take. Because previously I was thinking traditional HR, IO type work. And so finished my master's and I was looking to go do a PhD, but I had an advisor suggest to me that I actually just go get some work experience first, which I think to this day is one of the best pieces of tangible advice that I received. It's not for everyone, of course, but I do by and large, when I'm talking with undergrads who are interested in graduate school, I often ask them to consider some work experience first for a variety of reasons I'm happy to get into if we would like. But it really helped me. I worked in HR analytics for a couple of years, and it confirmed for me that I wanted to go back for my PhD. So I went back to George Mason University, so really, really amazing school for IO, especially, and completed my PhD there with Steven Zakharov, Phil Lee, Rich Klomowski. So big names in leadership and in measurement and machine learning and data science and so forth. And that really became my research brand, combining leadership and careers and the O side of IO, if you will,
Yeah.
with measurement. With how do we measure this using traditional statistical modeling, but also using all this modern machine learning GPT stuff that we have going on. And then to close off, I should say, and I'm happy to get into details, I did consider quite a few different alternative paths while in academia. I knew I wanted to be in academia, but I wasn't certain if I wanted to go down a traditional tenure track, more teaching oriented, more research oriented, or even alternative. ACT is kind of a
Yeah.
term that people are using today, alternative academic, which again I can get into. So I tried a bunch of different things. I did end up landing down that tenure track route, but I wanted a tenure track route at a balanced institution. I really didn't want to be at a pure research school, nor did I want to be at a pure teaching school. So I'm here now in my first semester at Claremont Mechanical College in Southern California, which, if you don't know, really is
Yeah.
as pure balance as you can get. We are a small private liberal arts school with only about 1,200 students, with 20% class sizes, 2 classes per semester. So really huge emphasis on close student connection and teaching, but also a lot of resources for research. We've got some of the biggest research names here, David Dave, Riggio, you've probably heard of them if you do anything in leadership studies. And so there's a lot of support and encouragement and expectation here to do high quality research, which is wonderful. So that's where I'm at, kind of a broad overview of the story, and would be happy to answer questions. Diving
Yeah.
into
Yeah, definitely got a couple. So the first one, and this one I've received, I know other individuals who are in the IO profession have received. So although IO has been around for a little while, there are still a lot of people when we share, okay, we work in IO. What does that mean? Are you, psychoanalyzing me right now? How does psychology play in the workplace? So when you share you work in IO or you have a background in IO, how do you share that in a way where individuals can start to conceptualize, oh, this is what it is?
Great question, and you're right. I get that all the time, especially because
Yeah, yeah.
so many people start in clinical and then they realize they want to go IO. It's quite funny. I don't really use the term IO in public,
Okay.
and I know some people might disagree with me, but I
Yeah.
just say I am an organizational psychologist, or sometimes I
Gotcha.
say I'm a quantitative and organizational psychologist, largely because of my heavy emphasis on data science, and actually my position here at Claremont is emphasized on the quant side quite a bit as well. But I go with organizational. I drop the industrial. I know why it's there, and I know why it's important. But unless, I mean, in my opinion, for your average public person, they don't care. They have no idea
Yeah.
what industrial,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I go with organizational, and I leave it as we study the psychology of how people think and behave in workplace settings. And that's usually enough to kind of clue them into, okay, I see what you're talking about. So
Yeah.
all your usual psychological concepts of personality and getting along and social
Yeah.
relationships and all this stuff, but now we're talking about it. What does that look like at a work? And we can then expand, of course, into, oh, well, it's
Yeah.
actually work and family, and there's also well-being in general, and there's performance in educational settings, and of course it goes beyond that. But yeah, that first sentence is usually enough to kind of give some validity.
Gotcha. And you mentioned the word quantitative, and so not everyone who is listening right now is
Mm-hmm.
as familiar with that term. So would you mind
Yeah.
sharing kind of what that means?
Yeah, so I sometimes have to explain two
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
things, right? So I say quantitative organizational psychologist, and that means I use advanced math stuff,
Oh, there you go.
ranging from statistics to modern data science and machine learning, and I apply it to understanding how people think and behave at work. For example, I use data science to try to measure leadership development, leader behaviors, career development, and career trajectories.
Yeah.
I use statistics to try to measure the things that we can't measure. And
Yeah.
I try to use data science and modeling to try to predict what might happen in complex organizations and teams in which we work. So that's kind of my 20-second elevator pitch.
No, and I love it. And one, so we're going to get into this a little bit later, but one of the fundamental questions is, and I've heard this before also, can leadership be quantified? And if so, how? So we're going to put that in our back pocket. We're definitely get into that a little bit later. But I am curious. You talked a little bit about your employment journey, and then how you were kind of at a crossroads to make a decision. Do you want to keep going the professional route, or do you want to go kind of the PhD route? And so I'm curious to get kind of your thought process, where you were at that point in time, and what kind of nudged you to go, I'm going to continue, my education and get this next degree.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question and hopefully relevant to a lot of people considering things, right?
I'm on
Um,
that boat. Yeah, that's so it's
yeah,
kind of
here we go.
yeah, personal for me.
Let me first kind of respond as if I'm talking to people who are late in undergraduate career or just finished college and are kind of trying to figure things out, right? Like
Yeah.
that's probably a lot of early career folk listening. And a lot of times I hear people who are interested in grad school because they were good at college and they were good in the classroom. They really liked learning and things like that. That's wonderful. That's a great starting point for wanting to go into grad school. But what I often try to help people understand is that grad school is not all about that, especially a PhD. Master's is a little different, and I can get into the nuances later, but especially a PhD, if you're going purely because you want to learn and understand things, the sad news is you're going to actually have some struggles there. Again, this is my personal opinion. So else might disagree with me, but I think one of the hardest things about going into grad school, especially a PhD program, is that the rules flip on you. In undergrad, the rules are, here's what you need to learn, here's what classes you need to take. I mean, no one's holding your hand entirely, but yeah, there's a structure. Like you take these classes, you do this, you get the A, you do this to graduate. There's a pretty clear structure on how to succeed in college, right? In PhD, it's not like that at all.
Yeah.
As a PhD student, you're told, hey, in 6 years, you need to graduate and have written these articles and pass your dissertation.
Yeah.
From now until then, it's not that you're on your own. And I've had to be very careful about this. It's not that a PhD student is on your own. A good PhD program, like my own at George Mason, is very supportive. Like I can text my advisor and ask
Yeah.
for help anytime. But the difference is they're not sitting down saying, to get there, you need to do this, this, and this in this week, and next month you have this deadline. And by the way, here's a project, and here's the structure of a project. I think anybody who's done research knows that we try to structure research, but we fail at it.
Yeah.
Research is just inherently not structured because we're trying to discover something new. And so a lot of students who come in fresh because they were good at school at undergrad, I found struggle because now they're in an environment where they have to make their own path in many ways. And they have to be the ones asking for help on how to get there. And to be very clear again, in a good program, they will get the help. They are not on their own. It's up to them to decide. Like, I put it this way, my advisor would tell me, here's a project. And unless it's a grant, he would not be the one saying, this needs to be done by this state. Instead, he's the one saying, when do you think you can get this done? And that's a very different experience for undergraduate students coming up. And so that's a big area for why grad school is different and how it may not be exactly what you dream of it to be. And I'll add more later of
Yeah.
it's also a lot of honestly sales. You have to sell what you're researching. You have to network like crazy to understand what other people are studying. So it's not just sit there and learn. And so that immediately might change people's perspectives on grad school versus industry. Now, at the same time, industry is not all that, right? And so at a very high level, happy to get into details offline if anyone's interested. But you're going to make more in industry. That's just the first given.
Yeah.
But there's usually less autonomy. That's one of the main reasons people stay in academia, because you have the autonomy to say, I want to study this, I want to do this in my timeline. And if you're good with that, great. If you're not good with that, that's where it struggles, right? So in industry, there's less of that. Like there's generally speaking, here's the project. Yeah, you have autonomy on how to do the project, but here's the project. And by the way, we need to present it to stakeholders, to our board of directors by next week or next.
Yeah.
It's faster paced. One of the reasons I did not prefer industry is, first of all, the autonomy, but also there is an element of you have to do what's going to be good for the bottom line of the business. Now, again, I actually think academia needs to learn from that a little bit.
Yeah.
We're kind of sitting here studying something and we never get it out the door because we're perfectionists. We want it to be perfect. But in industry, it's like, hey, if it's 80% there, let's get it out the door because we need to be first to get that market share. And I think we should learn from that a little. I think there's some lessons to be learned there. But I found that sometimes difficult, especially in my industry job, where there were times it's like I am literally saying I don't think this is ready, and I'm told no, we need to deploy it now.
Yeah.
That literally happens. So that's something that you see, especially in startups.
Yep, definitely. And so for me, I definitely line with that point that the impression I get in academia is everything has to be perfect. And if it's not, we're not comfortable moving forward with it. Where you're right in kind of, I don't want to say the private sector, but the working world, it's almost an iterative approach where we have kind of they refer to it as a minimal viable product, where at the bare bones, this is roughly what we want to move forward. Let's deliver, get feedback, update, deliver again, feedback, update, deliver again. Do you think that model can apply to research? Or is it, are they two completely different worlds where, never the two shall meet?
That's such a good question. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness. I wish there were ways to do it, but
gotcha.
it's such a hard balance there, right? Because of course we want to produce good science. So I would
Yeah,
never want to release something where I'm like, oh, I'm not really certain about my analysis.
yeah,
At the same time, anyone who does statistics or data or quantitative methods will know no analysis is perfect. You're always making an assumption. You're always saying, oh, I can't control for that. I don't have the degrees of freedom for it. My model's not going to converge if I put that variable in there. So it's never perfect. But at the same time, it needs to be as close as possible. So there's a tension there that I don't know how to answer. And I'm still early in my career. I'm learning to
gotcha.
figure out
Yeah.
the question, right? And that's at an individual micro, like single study level.
Hmm.
At a macro culture level, a culture of academia, there's that same tension because you're supposed to be the expert, right?
Yeah.
So we don't want to be anybody that's we need to be experts. We need to know
Yeah.
what we're talking about. But of course, no one knows everything. And then you throw in there the logistics of publishing and how the publishing
Yeah.
culture works and how the review process works.
Yeah.
To your point, I am very open to alternative publishing and review methods, even though I know that currently the way like I need to get tenure is it's not going to be through these modern. It's going to be through your traditional publications, and I'm going for that because I know that's what I
Yeah.
need to do. But I'm open to it, and I am in conversations with several organizations that are trying different methods. Because I think there is some future there. I just don't know how it plays. And so just one example I'll throw out there is a group called Octopus. They're actually based in the UK. And they're actually developing this platform of peer review where you publish your research piecemeal.
Okay.
You publish your literature review first. Then you get review on that, and you get discussion. And then it's almost like they do it almost like a mind map where you then publish your methods linked to that lit review, but then somebody else might publish another set of methods that are linked to the same lit review. And then somebody else might publish a data set that could be used with those methods. But then there's multiple data sets. And then someone else might publish his an analysis method and results linked to that particular data set, to that particular method, to that particular research question. But it could link to another research question as well. And so it's a very creative way of exactly what you said, iteratively doing research so that we're actually getting better at it and getting feedback along the way rather than trying to take 3 years to do one study and wait, honestly, another 2 to 3 years before it gets published. Yeah. It's creative, it's interesting, it's not your formal method right now, and it's not going to get credit on tenure right now, just being honest there. That might change one day, but we'll see. But I'm paying attention to it because I'm paying attention to what these types of groups are doing, and I'm interested to see where they go.
Yeah, I like that. And as you were sharing that, the first thing that popped into my head is it almost sounds like, is it called Octopus? Did I hear that?
Octopus. Something. Yeah, it's a UK group. But yeah, literally spelled Octopus. And if you Google Octopus research or something like that, you'll find it.
So it sounds as though this community may be trying to crowdsource research, and I had never considered that. I'm like, that's actually a really good idea. That, if somebody is really into, generating lit reviews, why can't they do that? Whereas if someone, is not as interested in doing that, but those two can kind of share their work through this platform, that can really help drive innovation forward. So that's definitely an interesting perspective.
And that's actually an interest of mine, by the way. Like, I'm in the middle of trying to think about in my spare time that I have building something to help researchers with this, because any researcher we know, any practitioner goes to a conference and they get these ideas, right? They meet someone, they're like, oh, you have this idea, I have this idea, let's collaborate, and let's face it, where does that go? Right? So sometimes they go somewhere, but very rarely, right? And so it'd be really cool to have that kind of crowdsourcing platform where I can share an idea that I don't have time to study. Like, I've got so many ideas that I just don't have the time or the data to do it. But I'd love to put it out there for somebody else to then use the data and who has the time to do that research or has the expertise that I don't in a certain particular area. Or vice versa. I've got the methodological expertise in a lot of areas, but I don't know the content behind certain topics even within IO. I'm not really a performance person, right? So maybe there's a performance person out there who desperately needs a particular analysis method that I could partner with. It'd be great if we had those types of networks. That's what I think breaks the boundaries of these disciplinary silos that we have. The problem is just getting faculty to do things because we're just entrenched in our ways of. And to be fair, like, I am too. Like, it's so hard to branch out and be like, oh, I'm going to try this and try that. Like, it's just so much easier to just stick with, here are the people I've published it before, here's the topic that I know deeply and I can easily write a paper on and keep going down that track. So it's easier that way, and I do that as well because it is easier. But I wish there were ways to branch out more to encourage faculty to do that kind of collaboration.
Yeah. And so for me, it definitely sounds like there's potentially a marketplace there. And I was even thinking, are there any kind of business alternatives to doing exactly what you just mentioned, where different companies or different individuals can hire individuals to complete specific tasks? And so the first thing that popped into my head were two. There's one called TaskRabbit and another called I think it's called Upwork, where depending on what you want done, I only want to hire this person for this one project at this one given time. Extrapolating that back out, why can't the same hold true for research? To your point, maybe, you're a quantitative genius. I'm not, but I have this really deep passion about this particular topic. I post it onto Octopus. We connect, we partner, and we both benefit, and potentially the community at large benefits as a result. So I'm interested in that. If you keep going down that route, I definitely want to, watch that journey unfold.
Sure. Yeah. There's definitely room for things like that, but it requires such a industry level culture change, right? Because a lot of us are still in this phase of also like, hey, I've got an idea, but I also am worried someone else is going to scoop that idea, right, and publish it before I can. And I get it. Like there have been a few times where I've kept an idea a little closer to myself because like I think I'm gonna do this and I do want to get it out first. So I get that perspective. But by and large, I would hold the perspective of if you've got an idea, let's see what like let's contribute to the science.
Yeah.
Let's have other people help us work together to make this work. So I don't know. That's
Yeah.
I try to take a balanced view on everything. So because I recognize there's pros and cons to every aspect. But this is definitely one of those areas where I think the future of academia is
Yeah. I
changing.
think so too.
Now we change very slowly, right? So I told people, so I'll say this publicly. So we'll see if I'm right or wrong, right? My
Yeah.
prediction is 10 to 15 years. I think 10 to 15 years before some major shifts
Yeah.
in how we do research, because it's already happening in how we teach with AI, GPT, online classes, and it's only a matter of time before the idea of change
Hmm.
infiltrates how we do research at the PhD and scholarly level, right?
Yeah.
So I give it 10 to 15 years, but I could be totally wrong.
Yeah. I actually think it's going to happen faster. So I'm
Hey,
thinking
we'll
5 to
see.
10. Yeah. Yeah. So with that, I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper here. So there are two key phenomenon that I'm really curious to get your thoughts on. And I'm not as familiar with this one. So if I am speaking completely, out of turn or it's not making any sense, feel free to ignore me. But I've heard this concept of synthetic data, where my interpretation is we can have AI recreate an entire population. And so rather than having to invite individuals in to participate in our study, we just ask AI to create a fictional population. Am I conceptualizing that the right way?
Yes, there's
Okay.
active research, pros and cons of that. People will get all fiery on debates on this.
Tell
I
me
don't know
more.
the
Yeah.
answer.
Oh,
Yes, I
okay.
don't know the answer, so I don't have a stance on this because I am still trying to figure it out myself,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
everybody else is, right? But there have been plenty of papers, especially in the past year or two, on yeah, can you use GPT to produce in silico data is another way people say it. So as if they are the human participant in silico in a human psychological experiment, right? I've actually got a paper under review that looks at the bias that
Interesting.
occurs when you feed GPT historical figures and ask them to provide ratings on leadership and things like that.
Okay.
So I've worked with some collaborators who are very much experts in machine learning, algorithmic bias, and so forth. So I have something there. I just saw a few papers come out on why you should or shouldn't use GPT to simulate data of that kind. Even more recently, I just saw something come out more in the social psych realm, sociology. It hasn't hit IO just yet, at least I don't think it has. But the idea of a digital twin. And so it's this idea of asking somebody to provide a massive amount of bio data, so biographical data, not
Hmm.
biological.
Yeah.
So things like just everything from your demographics to your history, what you participated in growing up. So like I think this particular study used a battery of like 2,000 questions or something like that. So huge data set. And then they gave that to GPT to create a digital clone or digital twin of this individual based on their responses to these 2,000 survey questions, and are able to then see how would this digital twin react to a certain thing, and does that mirror how would the actual human being react to certain things. You can imagine how controversial this can get, right? All
Yeah.
sorts of ethics involved, privacy issues
Hmm.
involved. There's so much at stake here, and yet I'll be honest, so much opportunity. Like how many
Yeah.
times do I wish I want to test something, whether
Yeah.
it's a test like just a new idea or a new reflection method or even teaching method, right? And if I wanted to really test it with humans to see how they would react, that's going to be a lot of work. But what if I
Yeah.
could test it with a pool of AI generated without thinking that I'm trying to test the actual quality, but just getting the initial response, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot here, but I
Yeah.
just want to be very clear how controversial it is because there's so many questions on ethics and privacy, on should you even do this? Does it even
Yeah.
work, right?
Yeah.
Like, is it even possible? There's so many questions, but you're right. This is, as far as I'm aware, a hot topic.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And so kind of the counterpoint that I've heard in terms of, okay, we have the potential for synthetic data, but on the flip side, with so much research that has occurred in IO and kind of looking broader in psychology and sociology in general, more often than not, it's a convenience sample where it is the college students who are undergrads, who need to take this for extra credit for their particular course. Is that a true representation of what, the average person actually looks like? And so I see kind of both sides where on the
Yeah.
one hand, there's this pushback against synthetic data, but on the other hand, we're always using, intro to psych, intro to sociology students to, get our results. How do we balance those two? Is there a way to balance those two?
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Yeah.
Psychology has been criticized,
Yeah.
especially in the past 2 decades, for focusing on weird populations, if
Yeah.
you've heard of that term, right? And focusing on college students, usually highly educated, from relatively well-to-do family backgrounds at large universities where they can afford to go actually a large university and so forth. So lots of problems with that. I know that especially in the past decade or so, the big journals are trying to move away from that. I think it's a given now, that a lot of the big journals in IO, they're just not going to accept a paper that's solely based on undergraduate students.
Gotcha.
They
Okay.
want you to actually survey or interact with the working adult. Now, that gets into the whole, you've probably heard enter prolific
Yeah.
research panel data. So that became the solution, right? So what was this, a decade ago, as people moved away from undergraduate student populations and still use them. I still use them, but at this point, it's largely for pilot testing.
Yeah.
It's just to try something out for the first time. And then more recently, people moved to, of course, the panel data online, but then bots and AI took over. So now
Yeah.
that's under a crisis as well.
Yeah.
I will say publicly, I find the Cloud Research Connect platform to probably be the best data quality that I could find. I used it for my dissertation, and I managed to get real individuals on a Zoom video call for 90 minutes to
Okay.
participate in my dissertation. So
Nice.
these are clearly real human
Yeah.
beings
Yeah.
on video and playing a game that I designed to test teamwork and actually trying. So the quality of data coming from them is probably the best that I've seen yet. But that was a couple of years ago, so maybe things have changed. And certainly there's been a lot of debate over panel data. So then that leaves your only choice is trying to get companies to hand over their data, which we all know how difficult that is. And it creates such a weird dynamic, even from almost an equity level of, think about it this way: as faculty, who's going to be more likely to get a large company to hand over their data? It's going to be senior faculty who have
Yeah.
experience, who have name recognition. So then you got junior faculty like myself, where nobody knows me. So how am I supposed to convince Disney to give me their data sets, right? That's not going
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
happen. And then if all the journals are saying, well, we're not going to publish it unless you do have actual real organizational data, then that puts me in a bind because I'm never going to then publish to get to my career to the level where I can get real organizational data. I'm not trying to complain here. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
point
Yeah.
out the dynamics that are at play right now due to the way that the research world has evolved. Right. And I again agree. I have so many concerns over student data. I have plenty of concerns over panel data. I agree organizational data is the way to go. But at the same time, those trickle down effects on those of us beginning our careers is something to be considered, something that we need to consider.
Yeah, definitely a rock and a hard place. And so, staying in the academic world, I'm really curious to get your thoughts on this. It might be a little early, but I forget where I was reading this or where I heard this. But essentially, I can't remember if it's the unemployment rate or the earnings are roughly equivalent in terms of individuals who have graduated with a four-year degree versus those who have only completed high school. And this, I believe, is the first time in history that's happened, where I can't remember if it's unemployment or first year salary, something along those lines. With that said, have you seen kind of a decrease or less individuals interested in continuing their education post high school and continuing into the college realm? Have you seen that at all?
Yeah, I've seen some news articles about this. I
Okay.
haven't seen that particular
Okay.
statistic yet. And I'm not an expert in K-12 at all.
Yeah.
So I can't really speak to the policy level things happening, but I can say something. So obviously technology has changed everything, right? And so I do recall very distinctly a few years back, the big tech companies announced that they are no longer requiring a four-year degree for their entry level technology jobs.
Yeah.
All you need is to show competence in the coding language. And you can do that with a 6 month certificate, right? You can get a competence in any coding language as long as you're motivated and you like it, right? But you can
Yeah.
get competence within 6 months in a boot camp. So you don't need a four-year degree for that, which means you technically don't need a technically, let me correct
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
technically don't need a 4-year degree to get a software engineer job at Google, potentially. So I I do believe that the value proposition of higher education is deeply at stake. It's being challenged left and right with online education, with technical certificates, with technical careers, even with trade careers, even. So I think it's it's a really important value proposition that we need to rethink how we articulate. Now, obviously, I'm in higher ed, so I do
Yeah.
think there is a position, and I don't have the answer. I don't know exactly how I would state it if I were trying to communicate this broadly. But where I would start, my starting point, it's just ruminating on, it's just an idea, is the idea of you might have technical skill, but do you have the soft skills of making decisions, communicating decisions, leading individuals, managing your time, and all of these things that I believe a classical liberal arts education will provide you, right?
Gotcha.
By studying history and literature and working in groups and working with students and managing your time in a 4-year degree, you learn these soft skills that are absolutely critical. And I put it this way, again, I don't have the data to back this up, so please, people can correct me all they want. I do think if you only took that career certificate to get the technical skills in coding, you can get to that high individual contributor, right? You can get your first 10 years of a career down where you just do the coding and you can get really good at the coding and you're great. But to pick up the skills to then take the next to the manager level, I think you need something beyond. Now, is that worth $90,000 a year tuition
Yeah.
room and board at some private schools? I don't know how to articulate that. And that gets into higher finances that I'm not an expert in. Right? How does financial aid work? How does all this work? I don't pretend to be an expert in those. I do want to build expertise there because that is firmly in my area of interest. But right now, as of now, I can't speak to that. So if someone asks me, is that worth $90,000? I don't know. I think it's worth something. And I think we in higher ed need to better articulate that and find ways to measure that and communicate that and show, is it worth 90,000? If it is, great. If it isn't, we need to fix the financial structure. That's kind of how we
Gotcha. 100%. I agree. So, transitioning topics now. So, leadership. I know that is a hot topic in terms of what is it? Can it be quantified? How can it be quantified? So, let's first start with, different individuals have different definitions of what leadership can be. From your experience, what do you see is kind of the one that's most agreed upon or the one that best resonates with you?
I can't answer the first question. I can answer the second question.
There you go. Okay.
There is no definition, as far as I'm aware, that people have agreed on. I have a book sitting on my shelf right now that says it's titled Leadership 700 Definitions.
Wow.
And
Okay.
measures and ways to lead and all, and constructs and studies. And so I am definitely in the camp of some scholars, some big names like George Banks, and I agree leadership is suffering from construct proliferation. It's suffering from a situation that we say there's too many constructs, referring to too many definitions, if you will. Definitions or measures. I'm using colloquial language
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Academical correct. That's okay. And there's too many of them, and they proliferate. They're overlapping. They're redundant. Many of them are redundant with one another. So let me put it this way: yes, there are differences in how people lead. That much is obvious. Anyone will agree. Yeah, there's clearly some way of saying like that person is a different leader. Even if they're all good leaders, they just do it a different way. How do we capture that in a definition or a set of different definitions? Is right now a completely there's some winners out there. There's some constructs that have really stood the test of time and are really doing well. And I don't want to name them because someone else might say, you didn't name my construct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Winners. I don't want to do that because I don't want to get myself in trouble. So I do think there are some winners out there and some that are stood the test of time. But by and large, yeah, I think it's messy. Now, my personal definition, I'm going to stick really, really broad. It's a starting and I go into detail. I think leadership is goal-directed social influence. At the end of the day, it's influence. I'm influencing
Gotcha.
another person. It's social. I'm not influencing a piece of technology, although with AI, that's a whole other conversation. But
Yeah.
generally speaking, it's not about me influencing a piece of technology. It's me influencing a group of people, social. And then finally, it's goal directed. There's a goal in mind. Like, we're doing this for a particular purpose. It's not just me influencing you for the sake of influencing you. So it's more broadly. So it's goal directed. So very, very broad definitions where it starts. This is where we don't need to get into all the details of measurement, but this is where like I said earlier, branded myself, if you will, at the intersection of data science and leadership. And not just leadership, the book that I just published is on career development as well. So anything that you would classify as a soft science where you can't take a ruler to measure. Leadership, career development, because how do you measure career? Number of promotions? Like, yeah, that's a clue, but that's not actually the definition of a career, right? It's just like leadership. How do you define career? There's no good definition. Personality is a little bit better. There's so much personality science out there that it's a little bit more sophisticated, if you will. I'm not saying leadership and careers aren't sophisticated, but they're just messy, right? But there's a lot of areas that you can't take a ruler to measure to. There's no clear definition. There's a lot of proliferation of constructs. And so that's my area. How do I use data science to try to take some steps towards understanding this method of field of study that we all acknowledge exists and is important, and there are clear differences between individuals in leadership, between individuals in careers. How do we actually?
And so, staying with the idea of leadership, you touched upon or you shared kind of the idea of personality. Are there other, what's the word that I'm looking for, factors or other characteristics, other data points that someone can take into consideration when someone says this person is an effective leader or this person is leading effectively?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I actually have been working on a project, so I'll kind of open the curtain on this a little bit.
Yeah.
It's currently being ready to be submitted, but it's a conceptual framework of trying to take this method of leadership and we're not presenting a new theory of leadership. We don't need a new theory.
Yeah.
We're trying to present an organizing framework through which we can understand leadership. And we call it the 5 and my advisor and I came up with this idea, and we refined it over the course of the past 2 years, and getting ready to be submitted right now. And so it's this idea of leadership can be thought of, and leadership is an elephant. It's that analogy of an elephant, and people touching aspects of the elephant, but not getting
Gotcha.
right.
Yeah.
So we're trying to say, to get the whole picture, you need to look at leadership from 5 different angles, and this captures most of the research out there. Not all, but it does a decent job of holistically looking at it. So very briefly, features refers to what are the individual differences. That's personality, that's cognitive ability, that's motivation to lead, that's sometimes some demographics, so the research around demographics and leadership is a whole other topic, cultural factors, things like that. So parts of your individual are going to influence how you lead. Then there's functions. That's the actual behaviors that you enact as a leader. And that part also is very important to distinguish, because there was a really good paper a couple of years back that argued that when we talk about leader behaviors, functions is the term I use, we're actually conflating several different things. So conflating what they did, what they intended to do, well, they did it, and how did people respond to it. So when you measure, quote unquote, measure behavior, you're capturing all of that in some mixed bag. So we're trying to say you need to really just understand, what are they actually doing? What's their behavior? Now that's very hard to measure. We're not going to get there in this.
Yeah.
So feature, function, fit. How does the leader then fit to the situation? The situation matters. And this ties into a long debate in IO about person-situation interaction, and this idea of, does the person matter or does the situation? Is the happy person going to be happy regardless of how bad the situation is? Or is the happy person going to be upset when they're in a bad situation regardless of how happy they are? Right? Person-situation interaction, both are true, so fit. Your leadership depends, at least in something to do with the situation. Then there's form, which is what kind of structure are you in? This is us bringing in some of the more macro level strategic leadership literature to say leading as a CEO is different than leading in a shared leadership model where you're kind of just a group of friends where there's not a leaderless group. Or that's also different from leading in a formal shared leadership model where you have co-CEOs or a board of directors with equal voting authority. That's the fourth one. And then finally, this focus. Leadership also depends on who your followers are. That's us bringing in more recent literature on followership, which is arguing that leadership is really best defined in the lens of the follower. Like, you're not a leader unless your followers are following you, is essentially the argument there. And I'm butchering the definition, I know. So those of you who are research followership will correct me a little bit there. But again, high level, if we can consider leadership through all five aspects, all five F's, if you will, we're arguing that that gives you a more holistic view to understand leadership.
Gotcha. And so this next question, I'm curious to get your thoughts on. So whenever I bring up the idea of leadership, whether it's hiring a leader or potentially engaging in succession planning and promoting individuals within, some of the thoughts and feedback I get is there are some individuals who are just born to lead. They're born, they have, the characteristics, maybe the five that you mentioned, that individuals are either born with it or they're not. So the question I have for you is leadership, can it be learned, or is it something that individuals are born with and they have it or they don't? What are your thoughts there?
Nature versus nurture debate,
There you
going
go.
back way.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but the answer is both.
there you go. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, leaders can be developed, and there are a whole slew of sophisticated methods that you can use to use stretch assignments, needs assessments, and all sorts of things to really get into the science behind how do you develop as a leader. And actually, David Day here at Claremont is one of the biggest names in leader development and leadership development, and he will push hard, and I will agree with him and many others on we need to stop the we call it leadertainment out there, which is just entertaining things that make it seem like you're developing as a leader,
Yeah.
but you're not actually following them.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a science to developing as a leader and a sophisticated approach to doing so, to challenging individuals, to getting them to reflect, to think towards what are their goals, both personally and professionally. And at the same time, people are born with different levels of potential. Right? Some people are just more naturally motivated to lead, or they come to a leader development program with more prior experience in leading and prior potential to lead. So it's like you're working from a different baseline for different people, right? Everyone has a different baseline, but everyone can also improve. So both ends.
Yeah, there you go. I like it. And so earlier in the conversation, you mentioned you have a book out. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about what it is? And yeah, give us a sneak peek.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for asking. So happy to share the link afterwards. And by the way, just to say upfront, I don't make any money off of the book. All the proceeds go to student research, just supporting student research. Please do buy it for the purpose of supporting research, but don't feel any pressure to buy it because I'm not trying to make money with this
Yeah.
project. The book is called From First Job to Career. It's published last month by the Cambridge University Press. So really, really excited. Obviously, top name publisher in academic publishing, and a really, really exciting book to get out, especially as an early career faculty member. And what we did is we interviewed 62 individuals about their careers, specifically about how they got their first job and where it's led them since. That's the name of the book, From First Job to Career. Honestly, the book was motivated by personal experience. It is much of research and publishing, right? So it's that experience of I finished my master's at the time and was trying to find an entry level job. And that was difficult. I took an assistant position that didn't even require a high school degree just to get out there, and then I moved very quickly into an analytics position and worked my way up and did fairly decently as a data analyst and people analytics and so forth. But I started at a very, very, especially coming out with a master's, right? I started somewhere where I wouldn't have thought I was starting. And itself was a pivot because I thought I was going to go to grad school. And I thought I was going to study IO, but I ended up as an assistant in general operations and a little bit of HR and then moved to people analytics. But the whole point is that I had that rough experience of applying to 200 jobs and then all my friends had the same experience. I just really wanted to capture that to help people understand That's that level of difficulty is, and it was really just me trying to push back against the traditional narrative of, hey, you majored in this, you go get a job in this career, and that's your job for your career, right? And sure, that's true for a lot of people, and amazingly true for some people. I know people who did wonderfully take on it. Probably not true for most, is what I would say. And so that's kind of the personal inspiration. It was also inspired by the book Working by Studs Terkel. People who have studied organizational behavior might be familiar with this book. Often assigned reading in introductory OB classes. It was for me. And it was similar. It was written in the 70s, if I remember. And it was, Terkel interviewed about 100 individuals and asked them, what does work mean to you? And it was all spots of life. He interviewed a truck driver, a receptionist, a successful business person, a politician, and learned what does work mean for them. And so I was inspired by this idea of capturing an anthology of people's stories, but this time focusing on their first job and focusing a little bit on modern day, what does that look like? Because of course, work has changed in the 1970s. So that's where the inspiration came from, and we're so excited to have it published because in addition to the stories, it's paired with a thorough review of the literature on vocational psychology and career counseling, and then the takeaways from these interviews. And so the hope is that this becomes a resource for individuals who are feeling like, I don't know what to do with my life, which we all felt that,
Yeah.
whether it's because of you just finished high school, college, or grad school, or because it's later in life, we've all felt it. And we wanted to have people be able to find themselves in one of these stories. And so we got a wide range. We have people who are stay-at-home parents for most of their life and then went into the workforce at 40. And we have people who, one of my favorite stories is someone who knew he was supposed to be a professional. He wanted to be a professional farmer. That's what his dream was. But he knew he couldn't make money off of that right out of college. So he went to be an investigative journalist and was very successful for 10 years. And at the height of his career, he said, all right, I saved up enough money. I'm going to go be a farmer. Now he runs a $2 million, multi-million farm and is very successful. But just stories of the ways that people navigate their careers. I hope people can learn from those and be inspired by them.
Yeah, 100%. Sounds like a book I'm definitely open to reading and, wish I would have read it, 10 years ago when I was, just getting ready to step out into the quote unquote real world. All right, Dr. Z. So we definitely talked about a whole bunch. We talked a little bit about your background. We talked about, leadership. We talked about your new book. Is there anything else you want to share before we call it a day?
No, I hope again people get in touch if they find anything interesting that we talked about, or even if you just want to debate me and say, "Hey, you were
Yeah.
probably wrong about that." I really disagree with you, Stephen. We can have those conversations. I think that's how we're all supposed to learn. Debate, constructive, structured debate is the way to go. Not yelling at each other, not calling each other names, but saying, "This was the point you made. This is why I disagree with it. Here's some evidence. Now, can we discuss?" And so I love that because I think that's everywhere in what we do in psychology, right? Should companies require in-person work? Should we use personality tests for hiring? Can we create an AI digital twin? There are so many places that we need to argue constructively with one another if we're going to push this. And having these types of conversations on podcasts, I love doing it because it's where we get to be a little more casual, right?
Yeah.
Debates in the literature are stifling and awkward. Just be honest about it, right? You can't really have a debate by writing academic literature. Every once in a while, it's a good one. That's not. So having a debate by just talking about it at a podcast, then interacting with others who have listened, that's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah. I like it 100%. And again, I thank you for being on the show. And until next time, I'll see you all in the next episode.
Thanks so much, David.